Good evening, everyone. I hope this finds you well. We're in Psalm 3 for this little Sunday evening devotion this evening. So if you have your Bible, please do open with me to Psalm 3 and follow along as we read it, and then we just look at it together. So Psalm 3, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom his son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all round. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. Well, after the two gateway psalms, the entrance psalms, Psalm 1 and Psalm 2, that teach us of the blessing of meditating on God's word and the blessing to be received by responding rightly to God's royal Son, we now enter into a section of Psalms where we see the royal king praying under a time of great stress and pressure. If you look at the context, you notice Psalms 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all are Psalms with sort of pressure, stress, conflict and difficulty in view. So for example, Psalm 4:2, how long will my honour be turned to shame? Psalm 5:1, Lord, give ear to my groaning. Psalm 6:2, be gracious to me, O God, for I'm languishing. Psalm 7:1, O Lord, save me from my pursuers, lest like a lion they tear my soul apart. So this Psalm 3, teaches us about where to turn when we are under pressure. And it's actually a wonderful psalm because, like so many of the psalms, it reflects our realities in life. We know that being a Christian doesn't make you immune to difficulty, stress, pressure, things that can make us anxious. But we do learn, especially in the Psalms, where to turn in the midst of the pain and brokenness of life in this world. And so this Psalm teaches us how to turn to the Lord, particularly in those times where we're feeling stressed and under real pressure. The Psalm is arranged really nicely in 4 sets of 2 verses, and we'll look at them each in their turn as we work our way down through it. First, we see the king praying under real pressure. Do you see how the psalm begins just in verse 1? O Lord. I'm sure there have been times in your life where difficulty has come your way and you haven't really known what else to pray other than just that cry of the heart, O Lord. And then notice what the psalmist does. He repeats this word many. How many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there's no salvation for him in God. Many, many, many pressures and strain all around the psalmist. And it's what the enemies, those oppressing him, are saying. They're saying there's no salvation for him in God. I wonder, have you ever been in that place where you've been struggling and pressures all around and you start to hear these voices that cause you to doubt your assurance? You wonder, is God even with me in this? Well, that's where David is as he pens this psalm. You know the context here that's given for us in the title. It's a time when he's fleeing from Absalom, his son. Imagine your own son rebelling, rising up against you. You're feeling fearful. You're wondering what people are thinking about you. You're the gossip, the talk of the whole surrounding area. And David just turns and says, "O Lord." And he just cries out in his pain and brings it all to God. We see the king praying under pressure in the first two verses. But then we see in the next two verses, verses 3 and 4, the king looking to God for his strength. I have found this little gem in verse 3 helpful time and time again. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. David looks to God as his shield. You're like this shield of protection all around me. You're my glory. I think that means that, God, you're the one who gives me a sense of worth and identity and dignity. You're my treasure. You're my glory. And then he just says, you're the lifter of my head. Isn't that beautiful? I know at times when my kids come running in and they've fallen or they're discouraged, their wee head, it goes down. And it's lovely as a parent to just crouch down and lift up their little chin and get them to look at you so that you can give those words of reassurance. The Lord is the lifter of our heads. When we are down, bowed down, under pressure, feeling low, feeling weary, God reveals himself to this psalm as the lifter of our head. That means he's the one who gives us hope in our times when we are sore, oppressed. He's the light in our darkness. He's our fountain of refreshment and joy, even in the midst of our difficulty, even when we don't feel it. The reality is he's the place of true rest for our souls. And so David looks to God to find strength in these verses. Then in verses 5 and 6, you see that the king finds confidence in God. I will not be, or verse 5, I lay down and slept, I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who've set themselves against me all around. If you follow the poetic journey of the psalm, it's quite striking. The psalm starts with the king under pressure. Then in verses 3 and 4, he gets this fresh vision of who God is, his shield, his glory, the lifter of his head. And now the theme of rest flows in to the psalm. When I see who you are, God, for me in the midst of my affliction, I see that you are my place of rest. You're the place where I find refreshment. You're the one who restores my soul and makes me to lie down in those green pastures, as David says again in Psalm 23. And then he doesn't just speak of finding rest now in this fresh vision of who God is. He actually speaks of finding confidence. He says, I'll not be afraid of all these things that are set around me and against me. Why? Because he's seeking his refuge in God. And that's not easy to do. David is just crying out to God in his affliction. He's saying, Lord, you're my shield. You're the place of my refreshment. And he's seeking to find his confidence going forward in the Lord. Rather than finding confidence in himself, he renounces self and says, Lord, you're the one who gives me strength. You're the one who gives me restoration and refreshment. And then finally that brings us to the last two verses, verses 7 and 8, where the king trusts in God as the one who will bring him deliverance from his enemies. This is quite striking. David prays, arise, O Lord, save me. You're the one that strikes my enemies. You're the one that breaks them down. And then he speaks of salvation coming from the Lord. I wonder, does this journey of David through this psalm remind you of anyone? A king rejected and surrounded by enemies? Enemies questioning, is God even with this one? Doesn't that remind you of Jesus on the cross? When people were surrounding him, saying, let God deliver him if he desires him. That was what they said in Matthew 27:43. Come down from the cross. If God is with you, then show us. But Jesus stayed there. The king then in this psalm cries out to God for strength and help. Think of Jesus in that garden of Gethsemane, calling on the Lord in his hour of greatest pressure and need. And then, where in this psalm the king speaks of lying down in sleep but rising again, think of Jesus lying down in the sleep of death after he was crucified, but then on the third day rising again. showing his victory over sin and death and the condemnation of hell itself. Jesus trampled it all through his glorious resurrection. And then you see the King who declares that true victory from all of our worst enemies comes from God himself, and see Jesus standing forth from the dead. And he is the one who strikes down our great enemy of sin, hell, death, and condemnation. And so with the psalmist, with Jesus, the true singer of the Psalms, we can say in verse 8, salvation belongs to the Lord, your blessing be on your people. You see, this is the King, Jesus, the true King, the true fulfiller of Psalm 3. He's the one who brings us relief from our greatest enemies. He's the one who strikes down our greatest enemies of sin and hell and death. And through his accomplishments, his salvation, we can know the blessing of God's salvation. So here again, this theme of coming under God's blessing is rich in this psalm. The blessing is known in Psalm 1 for meditating on God's law. In Psalm 2 from responding rightly to God's royal Son. And here in Psalm 3, in turning to the Lord when we are under pressure, when we see our greatest enemies, and instead of trying to deal with them ourselves, we renounce self-effort and we say, Lord, you're the one that has to deal with all of my enemies and oppressors. I can't do it in my own strength, and so I'm turning to you. And we find the true blessing for God's people found in when we let go of self-effort and we say, Lord, you must be my salvation. So I hope these reflections on Psalm 3 have been helpful and encouraging for you wherever you're at this evening. Just take away from this simple truth that God is the shield around us. He's our glory. He's the lifter of our head. He takes us from the pit, whatever it is, the pit of our sin, the pit of our self-effort, the pit, whatever mess we're in. He's the one who lifts us up out of the pit, lifts our heads, sets us in a new place, puts a new song in our mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. He is our blessing and our salvation. So I hope this will have encouraged you this evening as you just turn again now to the Lord and take some time to pray and thank him for being the one who has lifted your head and who lifts your heart and soul daily. He daily bears our burdens, and we have so much to be thankful for as we remember him and reflect on this psalm this evening. God bless.